evening. Another embarrassing blunder from the PM's most incompetent minister, letting down the family of a woman murdered by a released detainee. How long can Andrew Giles survive? Barnaby Joyce insists he doesn't have a drinking problem and he resists calls for alcohol testing in Parliament.
I have a problem if you mix alcohol with medication, and that was shown in brilliant form. I go long periods without ever having a drink.
We'll discuss that interview in a moment. Tony Burke refuses to cut taxpayer funding to a racist author who leaked details of Jews online, leading to death threats. The minister's pathetic response in a moment. Plus, I'll speak with the mother of a boy who's still lost in Gaza, held by Hamas terrorists. But first tonight, for all the bluster of anti-racism and community unity, the Albanese government is still sponsoring, backing financially to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars, individuals who are obsessed with using their positions to drive a wedge through the Australian community and attack, harass, berate, belittle and spread bile against people for one reason alone: being born Jewish. I can tonight reveal the Albanese government is refusing to cut government funding from individuals responsible for the racist sharing of lists of Jews online. For all the Prime Minister condemning those responsible, he won't actually step in to stop government agencies supporting them, even though one of them, Matt Chun, received $42,000 from Creative Australia last year. The government doesn't have a problem cancelling visas for racist individuals who want to come to our country, but then it won't lift a finger to stop paying the wages of those encouraging racism and division within our country. And this is despite Albanese sounding tough on the issue and calling for new laws that would presumably criminalise doxing.
And I've asked the Attorney-General to bring forward legislation in response to the Privacy Act review, including laws that deal with so-called doxing, which is basically the malicious publication of private information online. I've asked as well the Attorney-General to develop proposals to strengthen laws against hate speech, which we will be doing. This is not the Australia that we want to see.
Look, it's one thing to work on new laws, but leadership also means stopping taxpayer support for blatantly racist individuals. And those behind the outrageous sharing of lists of Jews that reminded many of us of 1930s Germany have now today been named. An investigation by The Australian reported that those behind the sharing of these lists included Elsa Chouette-Rosenberg, Z. Mazim, Matt Chun, Clementine Ford and Randa Abdel Fattah. The Australian reports that Matt Jones, who goes by the surname Chun on social media, was a key figure in the widespread dissemination of the documents. Now, he's reportedly received over $100,000 in grant funding over the past 14 years. Just a day after the terror attacks of October 7, he celebrated the terrorists. He called them freedom fighters and martyrs. He also said, and I quote, "death to the occupation." He's also described Israel as nothing but a hideous, bloodthirsty, white colonial project operated by an organised gang of insatiable racists and thieves. And he said in another post that people shouldn't be friends with Zionists. Zionists, of course, are people, usually Jews, who support Israel. And by the way, the vast majority of Jews actually do support Israel, the only Jewish state. So he's basically saying people shouldn't be friends with Jews. This is obviously incredibly racist. And he's been sharing his views against Israel online for a long time, well before October 7. Yet last year, he received $42,000 in grants from the government-funded agency Creative Australia, and this sits under Tony Burke's portfolio. You have to ask, why should someone so clearly racist receive vast amounts of taxpayer funds? Well, I asked Tony Burke today whether he actually did condemn the doxing of 600 Jews. And he said, Every Australian should be able to speak freely, including our artists. I've heard too many stories of artists being told that because of their views on the conflict, that they wouldn't be supported, they won't get contracts, or that their details will be released. It's all completely unacceptable, and none of it makes a single person in Israel or Palestine any safer. Now, that's a very muddled response. Burke didn't actually directly say that the doxing of Jews is unacceptable. He also has refused to intervene to cut government funding for Matt Chun. His advisor told me that Burke plays no role in funding decisions and it's all a matter for the agency, Creative Australia. Well, then we went to Creative Australia and they said that it categorically doesn't condone behaviour that breaks the law in Australia, which are in place to protect people's privacy. They said that Creative Australia is the Australian government's principal arts investment and advisory body. They're not an investigatory or regulatory body. They said they encourage anyone experiencing racism or hate speech to contact the authorities. And then what about this? They say we cannot speak to hypotheticals about future investments. A very weak response. I also asked the Prime Minister if he thought taxpayers should be paying for the salaries of these racist individuals. No response from him at all. Perhaps he was too busy speaking about how he designed the ring he proposed to his girlfriend with. Well, many families would love $42,000 in this cost of living crisis. Why should someone guilty of racism, who tells people not to be friends with Jews, receive such largesse? It makes no sense. Then there were others who shared the lists of Jews online who were exposed by the Australian newspaper today. Among them, Elsa Chewett Rosenberg. The Australian reports that she shared almost 200 Instagram stories that related to the doxing. She also leaked transcripts and names and professions and photographs from early in February. She's the Jewish founder of a social justice group, and at Melbourne's Next Wave Festival, she reportedly played a lesbian cyborg character. In one post on social media, she wrote, "Let these effing Zionists know no effing peace." Then there's Z Mazium, an anti-Israel activist who for the past fortnight has also been sharing transcripts from a leaked Jewish WhatsApp group. She's got an Instagram folder called Local Zios, where she identifies the names, pictures and businesses of some Jews. She called Zionists genocidal racists in a January 30 post. And in one anti-Semitic comment on the 3rd of February, she wrote, "They," and by that she meant the Zionists, the Jewish WhatsApp group members, "they are plotting, making moves and using their power to dox and damage." Now you can see both of those individuals here wearing T-shirts. One of them says, "All Zionists are bastards." Clementine Ford and Palestinian activist Randa Abdel Fattah also shared the details online. Ford is an abusive left-wing writer. She's got 250,000 followers on Instagram. And in one post late last year, she said she wishes anyone who supports Israel to be haunted for the rest of their lives. She said, and to any Zionist or Israel cheerleader still fixated on our propaganda BS, that this is somehow justified, I hope that every waking moment of your life has you haunted with the sound of children screaming. I hope you see their faces in your dreams. I hope you never get a single moment's peace ever again. It's unbelievable, the hate that these people come up with. Another post Clementine Ford wrote of Zionist women, "You're pathetic, you disgust me, and I pity you for being so effing basic and gross that you think others should cheer on the murders of thousands just to make you feel better." Now, Clementine Ford has taunted many people on her social media page who dared to stand up against anti-Semitism, and she targeted Mia Freedman just this week. Now, part of this doxing is trying to silence Australians, not just Jews, but Australians who support Israel into silence. It's menacing behaviour, it's intimidation. People then feel afraid to speak out because they don't want their business or their family's business to be impacted. They don't want the public attention, and they worry, and understandably so, for the security of their family and their children, for their home or even their work. Yet Clementine Ford, despite all of this conduct online, is still appearing at the Opera House for a women's festival. Now, it's one thing for the Prime Minister to condemn this doxing, and he's been praised for doing it. But real leadership, real action, real change is actually stopping sending taxpayer dollars to prop up those behaving in such an extremely racist way towards fellow Australians. Would the government fund neo-Nazis? Of course not. So why are taxpayer funds going towards left-wing figures who are equally as racist? Now, later in the hour, Dave Sharma will join me to discuss this. He's also going to talk about Penny Wong's remarks today on Israel going into Rafah. But joining me now, commentators Jason Morrison and Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio. Terrific to see both of you.
Thanks, Sharri.
Now, it's Peter Dutton was back on the attack today over Andrew Giles and his abysmal record on the detainee debacle. Have a look at this from Question Time.
Earlier today, I spoke to Andrew, a member of the family whose mother, Svetlana, was brutally murdered by Tony Khalasar, one of the 149 criminals the minister released. He is disgusted that despite the minister's undertakings, no one has contacted the family. They fear the murderer turning up at their home. Why hasn't this family been contacted as the Minister and Deputy Prime Minister promised?
The government is committed to ensuring that all victims and their families are supported, noting, of course, the privacy restrictions and the fact that the vast majority of these victims are, of course, victims of breaches of state and territory laws, not Commonwealth laws.
Danica, I mean, this is appalling. You have families who are living in fear that the newly released criminal detainees might attack again. They haven't heard from anyone in the government.
It's absolutely appalling. And to make matters worse, Sharri, just when you think it couldn't get any worse, Andrew Giles then went to the opposition leader to ask for the phone number of this woman because he didn't have it. Honestly, make it stop with Andrew Giles. He has to go. He has to go. His performance every day has become worse and worse. He's clearly not across his brief. He doesn't know where these asylum seekers are. He doesn't know if they've got an ankle bracelet on or not. If one turned up in his own backyard, he wouldn't even know. For somebody that's meant to be in charge of the department, who should know all these basic facts, he knows nothing. His performance is embarrassing. It is a blight on the government. They need to get rid of him, or he should do the right thing and resign. It can't go on like this.
Well, this is the flaw in the government's argument, I think, Jason. You know, they say that they've got all these measures in place to protect the public from these released criminals, but then there have been 27 reoffences, so they can't be monitoring these criminals that closely if there have been 27 reoffences in just the past couple of months.
Yeah, and they're not particularly transparent about the whole process too. I mean, they're looking for answers on this. There are none. This immigration minister, I mean, you know, you think about what are the things that matter to Australia? The defence of the country's finances, the energy supply and the immigration. And immigration minister's a dipstick. The energy minister is a dipstick. The Treasury situation is appalling. And, I mean, defence, we can't recruit people. They have got so many problems at all bearings at the moment. You know, I fear if they move this bloke out, which other Tom and Jerry are we going to get in the spot? It's a real dilemma.
Although, as I reported last night, he is a far left figure. He's been soft on border security and immigration, as we looked into.
But when you look at that vision, you can see he's not sitting on the front bench. He's in the junior ministry. He's the next row back. That says plenty. Immigration is one of the biggest problems for this government. The number of people coming in, where they're coming from, where they're going to, what they're going to do when they get here, and the impact on Australians that are here at the moment. And they have a guy who's essentially a union puppet in the back seat, who's not even in the real full-on ministry. He's not even in cabinet. And he's making the calls on something. And this is personal and public security It's just extraordinary.
Now, we learnt today in The Australian that there's been secret polling paid for by the Labor Party, which revealed that Queenslanders were unhappy with Anastasia Palaszczuk's performance, and that was why, or one of the reasons used to get rid of her, replace her with Stephen Miles. But Danica, I don't think changing the leader has changed the reasons why Queenslanders were so unhappy with this government.
No, correct. And we also have to remember that Stephen Miles was the Deputy Premier underneath Anastasia Palaszczuk. So that legacy is actually continuing on with Stephen Miles, who's clearly not up to the job. Look, the results were interesting. Cost of living, number one. Youth crime, number two. What has Labor done to help the youth crime crisis? We've seen in recent weeks there's been cases where it's gone out of control and nothing has actually been done. I don't think you needed to pay $400,000 as well for a poll of taxpayers' money to tell you how poorly that government has done. Queenslanders, I think, would be looking to change government. And if you were David Crisafulli looking at these results, you'd be thinking, I'm firmly in the box seat. I could possibly win this election later this year.
Yeah,
possibly.
Possibly.
You reckon he's got it in the bag? But look, Stephen Miles, look, another example is when he laughed last week. Yeah. Remember when our reporter up in Queensland asked him a question on youth crime, Adam Walters, and he laughed about it. He laughed. There's a vision there. He laughed. So he's just hasn't got the spine or the backbone. He is from the Palaszczuk legacy.
Yeah.
And Anastasia Palaszczuk, had 42 members in the parliament, something like that, of which so many of them, Queensland is so vast, they're scattered. They're not just all concentrated in inner western Brisbane. They're all over the state. Does she not talk to backbenchers? If you want to look at some of the greats of Labor, Prime Minister Hawke was pretty good at talking to backbenchers and getting a read on the country. Peter Beattie was pretty good at talking to... Bob Carr was pretty good at talking to backbenchers when he was Premier of New South Wales. She has all these people with market research of reality in their communities, and she never bothered to find out. We relied on surveys.
It's always relying on polling instead of actually speaking to the people.
Real people.
Now, we just saw Barnaby Joyce go on Andrew Bolt's show, and he gave a revealing interview where he accepted responsibility. He said he doesn't have a drinking problem. I'm going to show you those comments in a moment. But I think what's really interesting, Danica, is that we've seen this week the tale of two drunken sagas, if you like, where one, the commander of Australia's most lethal warship, had this drunken incident apparently which caused an international embarrassment. He's been stood down. You've got the same behaviour, drunken incident with Barnaby Joyce, and he hasn't taken any leave. Does this say something about how it seems there's one rule for politicians and another for the rest of working Australians?
Look, what I will say is I think that Barnaby Joyce has taken responsibility for this, and you would see it on Andrew Bolt's show. He's come out, he has apologised. On the other hand, though, we have a senior commander in the Australian Navy. They're there to protect us. Now, if this was an incident on board a ship, that's a problem. What would happen if a conflict broke out and you have an alleged drunken leader? That becomes a problem. I don't think that what Barnaby did was great. It was ungracious, him lying on the floor. He made a complete error in his judgment. Is he going to go for this? No, I don't think he is going to go for this. Should he take a leave of absence? Probably. Go reassess. Go sort yourself out. So in a way that there is that hypocrisy, but
He's refusing to do that, though, Jason. David Littleproud, both Peter Dutton and David Littleproud, who's the Nationals leader, said take a leave of absence, Barnaby, and he's
Littleproud wants him out of the gun.
Of course he does.
But look, pissheads commanding a ship kill people.
Correct.
Right? Pissheads in Parliament join a big club.
Well, hold on.
There's
in
a lot.
opposition, it's fine, but in opposition... Fine, but what if they're a cabinet minister in government? What if they're the defence minister?
Not good.
Or
none of it's good.
Minister?
None of it's good. The only thing that's good in this is a bloke who I actually think a lot of Australians believe speaks his mind and speaks their language and represents their views. Made a stupid mistake, made a real DICK of himself, and as a result of things has taken resposibility. He looked a beaten favourite on Andrew Bolt. I saw him the other morning on Sunrise. He looked, there's some dramas in his life. There's been a lot of dramas in his life. But, when he started talking about power bills, right on the money.
Correct.
And to me, I look at it and, the New South Wales government, I'm sorry to go into deep history, but we talked about Bob Carr a minute ago. Bob Carr and the Labor Party in New South Wales sustained a member of Parliament who could barely stand up and used to wet himself in the bar. And he was a rolling joke for many years in the New South Wales Parliament.
It was a different age,
It was a different age, but I'm just saying that was inside the New South Wales Parliament. This bloke was pissed at the pub. Yeah. And made a fool of himself, and I think there's a vast contrast. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to the Prime Minister because he announced his engagement today. Look, everyone else has been celebrating more today, but in my opinion, could there be a less original, more corny and more cringeworthy day to propose to your girlfriend than Valentine's Day? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Nonetheless, here's how other people responded to the news today.
And I extend to the Prime Minister and to Jodie, I'm sure on behalf of the whole House, our congratulations and best wishes to you.
I can only say I'm so pleased for the both of them, delighted to hear this news.
Well, you'd have to be a bit of a narc not to congratulate the Prime Minister and his now fiancée, Jodie Hayden, for this announcement. That they're going to be married. It's a joyous occasion for both of them.
Is he going to say yes to her and then retract it? What? At the wedding? He says I do, but he probably won't.
Do we really need another union, Chris? Is that really what we need right now, just to slow down more productivity? The nation's been on its knees for months now, but it's nice to see Albo's decided to join us and get down at least halfway and get down on one knee with us. Jodie, my word is my bond. And you would make me the happiest man alive if you would just, take me seriously, trust me for a little bit. I promise, my position hasn't changed, Jodie.
Very funny.
That guy's good.
He's hilarious.
I heard a funny call on radio. A bloke called up and said, hey, he finally found someone to say yes.
Yes, exactly.
I thought that was a good line.
60% of Australia did not reject Albanese this time.
Good on him. And I disagree with you on the Valentine's Day thing. There'll be so many people who will be today glowing because of what happened in the little Albanese.
Come on, seriously, it's so corny.
Danica, Ray Hadley did point out this morning that this is what Ray Hadley said.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister could have chosen any time to propose. He's done it now, and it's going to give him a boost.
Of course it is. But also, did they really get engaged yesterday, or they're just holding out for the announcement, making it look all pretty? Look, we got engaged on Valentine's Day. We're so in love. I think it's ridiculous.
Nobody cares.
Okay, let's figure out the timing though. Let's see when they get married. Do they do a quick fire? Do they get married really quickly, get married a couple of days later, he calls an early election? What are they going to do?
I think it'll definitely have an impact in the polls.
Of course.
Anyway, there you go. I don't mean to be so cynical. I believe in love. I'm happily married.
Absolutely.
But someone proposing on Valentine's Day is the least original idea
Absolutely.
ever.
I agree, Sharri. I'm with you all the way.
It now appears there is nothing the man can do right, even propose.
Well, at least he'll remember the day. He'll remember the day forever. He'll never be in trouble.
Because I don't. I forget all the time. So,
Jason Morrison, Danica DeGiorgio, great to see you.
Thanks.
Now, mining giant BHP is looking at shutting down its entire WA nickel division on the back of soaring exports of cheap nickel from Indonesia and a wave of mine closures in the region. 3,300 jobs are now at risk. And Queensland National Senator Matt Canavan joins me to discuss. Great to see you, Matt. Look, is this going to mean the end of the Australian nickel industry, and is it the right move?
Well, it's a sad, terribly sad move, Sharri. Obviously, the personal impact on the 3,000 workers directly affected is horrific. The refinery and mines itself are basically the heart of a town called Kambolda in Western Australia, about 600 kilometres west of Perth. Obviously, the businesses and other workers outside the mines in that town will face an uncertain future. It's terrible. And what is doubly terrible is that this tragedy should have been avoided. But our naive and inept leadership that we've had at both the corporate and political level last few years has caused this. This is a direct result of our net zero obsession. These are victims of our signing up to this unachievable, fantastic target of net zero emissions. What's happening here is Indonesia is taking all these jobs. Indonesia is dominating the world's nickel markets because they are building coal-fired power stations. They have expanded their use of coal in 2022 by 32% in 1 year to fuel this massive expansion of nickel refineries. They are capturing all the market because they've got cheaper energy and they're producing the nickel cheaper. And unfortunately, the victims of our naivety won't be the corporate and political leaders who have made these decisions and caused this fallout. It'll be those thousands of workers in Western Australia who lose their jobs.
And also, we've just, in terms of energy impact, we've just seen a blackout, and there's still about 80,000 people who don't have power in Victoria as well. Now, Matt, I want to ask you about this explosive story that's come out of the United States from independent journalists that apparently the CIA asked the Five Eyes intelligence agencies, and that, of course, includes Australia, to spy on 26 Trump associates. Now, you've just asked DFAT, and that's the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, about this topic at Senate estimates this evening. So tell us what you asked and whether they admitted to conducting any spying on Donald Trump and his team.
Well, we don't have an answer yet, and that's not surprising given these incidents apparently occurred in 2016, so some time ago. But officials tonight have taken this question on notice, and we'll wait and see what their response is. There is a question to be specifically asked to our foreign affairs officials here and Australia in particular. As you say, this is a bombshell report. We kind of knew, though, before this report in the last couple of days, that Australia was involved with the instigation of the discredited FBI Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and that's what led to the whole Russia quote hoax. That's how it all kicked off, and it kicked off as a result of a discussion between the then Australian ambassador to the UK, Alexander Downer, and a Trump official, Mr. George Papadopoulos, in a London pub. Now, I suppose the previous idea was that this was just a random meeting, if you like, and some of this information was then misused to start this investigation. As I say, this discredited now investigation. But now this report raises the suggestion that, in fact, perhaps, and we don't know, but perhaps this meeting was actually at the instigation of US intelligence officials. And look, I think there's serious questions to be asked here because obviously we give a lot of responsibility to our intelligence officials. They have huge power to surveil almost all of us. And if it's been misused like this, there has to be questions asked and there has to be steps put in place to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I mean, it's so outrageous on the one hand, but then on the other, you know, we saw that massive list of former intelligence officials and national security people who signed that letter saying that Donald Trump shouldn't be president. So it's not a surprise that big parts of the intelligence community have these views and have these strong political views, and that, you know, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that they might misuse their powers for that reason. Matt Canavan, thank you so much for joining me. Now, coming up, I'm going to be joined live by the mother of a boy who is still being held hostage by Hamas. Plus, another shooting rocks the US, this one at a Super Bowl rally. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, it's been 4.5 months since the October 7 terror attacks, when 240 Israelis were captured by Hamas. Some hostages have lived to tell the tale of the horror that they faced, but there are still around 100 innocent Israelis in Gaza. The families of those who remain captive are waiting anxiously for any sign of life. Among them is one mother, Rachel Goldberg. Her 23-year-old son, Hirsch, had his arm blown off when he was loaded into a Hamas pickup truck and taken to Gaza. Rachel joins me live now. Thank you so much for your time, and we're all so sorry for what you're still going through 4.5 months after. Where was Hirsch? What happened to him on October 7?
So first of all, thank you for having me. So Hirsch and one of his best friends from childhood were attending the Nova Music Festival, which was advertised as a festival for love, peace, and unity. And on Saturday morning, October 7th, when the massacre began at the Nova Festival, which ultimately killed 367 of those young people who were attending, Hirsch and his friend managed to escape to a roadside bomb shelter and were hiding with 27 other of the kids from that music festival in a very small 5-foot by 8-foot room, the bomb shelter. And Hamas came to the doorway, and first they threw in hand grenades, and then they sprayed the room with machine gun fire. And most of those kids were dead right away. There were 18 that were immediately dead. There were 4 people, young people trapped underneath those bodies. And it was from those 4 people that we heard what happened to Hirsch, which is that he and 2 other young men were wounded, but slumped against the wall on the opposite side of the room. And when Hamas came in and entered the bomb shelter, they saw Hirsch and these 2 boys who were clearly alive. They couldn't pretend to be dead. They told them to stand up. When they stood up, that was when these witnesses explained to us that Hirsch's left arm from the elbow down had been blown off. Hamas ordered the 3 of them to come outside. They were put on a Hamas pickup truck and headed toward Gaza. Our last phone cell signal from Hirsch was on the morning of the 7th of October at 10:25 in the morning from inside of Gaza. And then subsequently, we received actual video footage from Anderson Cooper from CNN, who came across it while doing a documentary about the Nova Music Festival. And that has been widely seen. And that was when we got to actually see Hirsch being taken out at gunpoint, and he was put on this pickup truck. And when he turns to sit down, we see the left stump where his arm used to be. And I will mention that Hirsch, like me, is left-handed. So that was his dominant arm.
Yeah, it's just absolutely horrific. Now, since then, some hostages, as I mentioned, have been able to come home to Israel. There's been news that others have been killed. Their bodies still held in Gaza, though. Do you believe that your son is still alive?
We do. We actually, have been told by the intelligence community that the families of the tragically dead hostages have been contacted, and this is a situation where they feel that no news is decent news. I'm not going to say it's good news. I think it would be impossible to describe what we're going through as, good news. But what we understand from the hostages who were released at the end of November is that hostages who were taken very early on Saturday morning, October 7th, were taken for treatment. And Hirsch was taken in the 8s. He sent us 2 WhatsApp messages at 8:11 saying, "I love you and I'm sorry." And so we know that by 8:11, he knew he was in trouble. We knew he was in trouble. And so the working assumption is that he did receive some form of treatment early in the day on Saturday, and we are praying that he is alive and managing to survive in these very agonizing times. And what I say to myself is that hope is mandatory. So that's where we are.
Don't know how you manage to keep going every single day. As we know, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, are now going into Rafah. 2 hostages have so far been rescued from Rafah. Are you hopeful that he may be in Rafah, or do you have any intelligence at all about where he might be being held?
So we don't. I don't know if the intelligence community has that information, and maybe they aren't sharing it because there are so many families. This is such a unique situation that you have hundreds of people, because you have, families of over 100 people. So you have hundreds of people who are wanting to know information. And I'm not sure that the intelligence community, whoever those intelligence services are, there are many parties involved in this. I don't know that they can really share that with families, but of course I'm concerned for any people who are innocent, who are caught in the crosshairs of this, desperate situation, whether those be hostages or innocent Gazan civilians. I mean, there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of us suffering from this situation. And we did celebrate the release of Fernando and Luis a couple of times ago. That was like finally a whisper of, something to be happy about during these excruciating 132 days. But we are also, and the the diplomatic community here, the intelligence community here has said that the real release of hostages is going to have to be, of course, it would be wonderful if it was the army was able to rescue them, but it is going to have to come from some sort of diplomatic negotiations.
Yeah. Rachel, I have to tell you that all of us in Australia are thinking of you and all the family members of the hostages literally every day. There's not a day that goes by when we aren't thinking about you all and hoping that your family members, your boy Hirsch, comes home. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, now onto another serious story, the disappearance of Ballarat mum Samantha Murphy, and it's now being treated as suspicious. The mum of 3 vanished 10 days ago after setting off on a run through bushland near her home. Victoria's Police Chief Commissioner Shane Patton said today that it's unusual that we haven't been able to locate any trace of her or any other evidence within that period of time. And so obviously having missing persons involved, it's suspicious. Whether it means there's foul play or not, I don't know. And at this point, the homicide squad are not yet involved. Now coming up, a new poll reveals the top 2 issues that voters have with Biden, and shots are fired during a Super Bowl parade. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, Nikki Haley is warning Republicans that Donald Trump isn't the same man he was in 2016 as she desperately clings on to the race for nomination.
He is not the same person he was in 2016. He is unhinged. He is more diminished than he was.
You endorsed him when he ran again. You were a vocal supporter. You were out on the campaign trail.
I'm the first one to say I voted for him twice. I was proud to serve America in his administration. But you can go back and look in my book. I cite multiple times, and he knows it, when I called him out for things that he was doing that were wrong. Since I got out of the administration, I have called him out multiple times.
All right, for our World News panel tonight, joining me, strategic analyst and co-founder of AusThink, Paul Monk, and the founder and director of Strategic Analysis Australia, Michael Shoebridge. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Paul, what do you think about Nikki Haley now? She's still hanging in there, presumably in case Trump ends up in jail or something happens to him.
Well, there is that possibility, of course, and I dare say that that's got to be part of her calculation for hanging in there as she is. But the question, of course, is very much about, and I think she's raised this herself, how is the RNC running its campaign, and where Trump is channeling money into his court cases and they appear to be short of money. There's a bit of a mess behind the scenes there. And it'd be lovely to see that clarified. But I think you're right about Haley's sense of the situation. What remains to be seen is if it takes months for any conviction to come through, and then there's got to be a decision as to how, in fact, that affects Trump's candidacy, where exactly does that leave Nikki Haley and the Republican Party?
Look, we're seeing poll after poll showing that Joe Biden is struggling with his approval ratings among Americans. The latest one, a new poll from Gallup, says he's just got a 41% approval ratings. Immigration and the economy, the top 2 reasons why voters think he's doing a poor job. Michael, surely the Democrats have to give up on Biden if they have any chance of having a candidate who could be competitive against Trump?
Well, I think the big problem is a lot of American voters don't want either of the potential candidates, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And so it's a race to the bottom. Nikki Haley is electable, polls show, but she's a candidate that, while Trump dominates the Republican Party, is not selectable. So that's the real problem. And it comes from having a 77-year-old Trump and a Biden who'll be 81. Nikki Haley is trying to get people to focus on what Donald Trump is saying, just like all this focus about Biden having all these missteps. But no one's listening. Trump is channeling grievance and anger. People aren't really interested in his words. So in that event, it still looks like a Biden-Trump contest. And the polls show that if that happens, It's really tight.
I think I've always thought Nikki Haley was a very impressive figure, and she does have a lot of support in Australia because of how well she executed herself when she was America's representative to the United Nations. But, you know, you're right, among the Republican Party, Trump just seems to have the majority of voters wrapped up, and we've seen that in the couple of primaries that have happened so far. Look, major news in the US today. 1 person dead, 21 injured, including children, after a mass shooting broke out at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl victory rally. Look, they're currently treating 11 children for injuries following the attack. Paul, this is really yet another senseless shooting in the US.
Yeah, and you know, one has to say, whenever these happen, there tends to be an outcry about gun laws in the United States. And one could certainly approach it from that point of view. But there are actually countries in the world that have just as many guns per capita as the United States, and they don't have all these mass shootings. So I think you really have to look at something other than simply gun ownership or gun laws. You have to look at the social psychology that generates this violence. And the United States, of course, is a complex and in some ways not altogether cohesive society. That's where I'd be looking. So it's lamentable that these things occur. But one also should bear in mind that we get to focus through international media and US reporting on these incidents. We always need to remind ourselves that there are many countries in the world, including most of the countries in the Western Hemisphere, whose homicide rates are far higher than that in the United States. You know, you just go south of the border and Mexico's is 6 times that of the United States. So we do focus on these incidents inordinately because we get the reporting and because other Western democracies tend to have much lower homicide rates than the United States. But it is a complex equation and it needs, you know, careful thought and somebody, of course, courageous enough to do, dare I say, what John Howard did in this country and step up and say, we do need to reform a few things here.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that that still hasn't managed to happen in the US. Mike, I want to ask you about another story. There's this report in the New York Times that United States intelligence is reporting that Russia has apparently advanced on a new space-based nuclear weapon. This is apparently a satellite killer that could, if deployed, destroy military communications, surveillance, even command operations. This seems like kind of something that you'd see in a movie, but apparently this is what Russia's developing.
Well, Sharri, this isn't really a surprise to hear that Russia is developing weapons to destroy American satellites, because American satellites are key to America's strategic and military power and, of course, the globe's economy. There are anti-satellite weapons already. There are anti-satellite satellites on orbit, and the Chinese have many of these systems. So the Russians and the Chinese are focused on taking away America's satellite advantage. But the details of the particular Russian weapon we can't know. Russia's now on a war footing. They're spending 40% of their GDP on military matters, and they've always invested in space, missiles and nuclear technology. So it's not a surprise.
It is certainly terrifying. And when you have journalists conducting soft interviews with him, it's even more worrying. Paul Monk, Michael Shoebridge, thank you both so much for your insights tonight. Really appreciate it. Now, after the break, should the government cut funding to racists who've shared lists of Jews online? Well, Dave Sharma will join me to discuss this. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, the Liberal Senator for New South Wales and Australia's former ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma, joins me now. Dave, thanks so much for your time. Look, I spoke at the start of the show about how the Australian government, and I put questions to the Prime Minister and to Tony Burke and to Creative Australia on this today. They're refusing to cut funding from individuals who receive taxpayer funding who've been responsible for the widespread dissemination of lists of Jews online. Do you think these individuals, clearly guilty of racism from their online posts, should be receiving tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars?
No, I don't, Sharri. I think it's outrageous, and I think the responsible minister and the responsible department need to be looking into it as a matter of urgency. I mean, these individuals have jeopardise the safety, the security, the well-being, the businesses, the livelihoods of, 600 or more Australians by publishing or doxing and putting out all the details online. And we've already heard stories of people closing their businesses, parents picking their children up from school because they're concerned that someone will identify them, people, moving homes, all sorts of damaging consequences from this. And the idea that the people who maliciously and recklessly circulated this information should not only face no sanction or moral opprobrium, but should be living off government grants is just insufferable.
I mean, the Prime Minister talks a good game. He said he's asked the Attorney General to look at new laws, both for doxing and for hate crime. But then nothing when it comes to making sure they're not, literally supported by the taxpayer. One of the individuals, Matt Chan, received $40,000 taxpayer funds from Creative Australia last year. Again, Creative Australia won't even say that it's not going to fund these people again in the future. Some families, as you indicated, have even received death threats. This does remind a lot of people of the sort of lists that were compiled in 1930s Germany.
Absolutely. It's got strong echoes of that. I mean, lists of Jews were compiled and circulated, businesses were boycotted, homes were vandalised and defaced. This is, 1930s Germany. And we're seeing that sort of stuff here in Australia. And the problem to my mind here is that the government has not been quick enough or firm enough in acting to, firstly, condemn this behaviour, but secondly, take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. In this instance, Sharri, we've had the social media platforms acting with greater urgency and greater efficiency than the government. Social media platforms have been taking down and removing this content because it's insightful and hateful and violates their policies. Why can't the government be moving with the same level of urgency? Because what we're talking about here is not just the fate of a particular group of Australians, but the fate of all of Australia. Us as a multicultural, unified, single nation of people of different ethnicities and religions being able to live harmoniously together.
Absolutely.
That is being torn apart right now.
Exactly, and we've always prided ourselves on being a successful multicultural society. Dave Sharma, I also want to ask you about Penny Wong and the PM's comments today about Israel going into Rafah. They've urged Israel not to go into Rafah. What's your view on the Foreign Minister's intervention here?
Look, I think the government is right to have concerns that international humanitarian law and that civilians need to be protected. But by the same token, Israel has a right to militarily defeat Hamas and to recover its hostages. Israel's right to self-defence includes using military means to recover hostages. And we saw, two of the hostages who are still being held were rescued by the IDF in a military operation in Rafah yesterday. So I'm not particularly comfortable with us Monday morning quarterbacking a military operation overseas. Yes, we can and should insist that Israel seeks to minimise civilian casualties, observes the principles of proportionality and distinction and other features of international humanitarian law. But they also have a right and indeed a duty to their own people to militarily defeat Hamas and to recover their hostages. And I think, we need to be careful not to go around second-guessing these operations.
Well, Israel knows that it has to respond according to international law. I don't think Penny Wong continuing to lecture Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu is going to make a difference. It just encourages more antagonism towards Jews here in Australia. Dave Sharma, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for your company this week. I'll see you Monday at 8 o'clock. And right now, here's the man of the hour, Paul Murray.